So, Dodi, just a quick note on the audio here. Obviously, we're all working from home, as are all of our interviewees. So the quality is not what we would really want in a podcast. I think that means a big credit to our producer as well, Thomas, who is doing a great job with the audio that we are able to record. But with that, on with the episode. So, Dodi, we're going to go into some really hardcore science today. What comes to your mind when I say quantum physics?
Well, I think about that old TV show Quantum Leap.
Theorizing that one could time travel within his own lifetime, Dr. Sam Beckett stepped into the Quantum Leap accelerator and vanished.
Do you know it?
I do know it, and it was absolutely fabulous. And it was Dr. Sam Beckett traveling all around the universe in time and space, solving difficult riddles and problems.
And his main advisor was a hologram.
That's exactly right. And that's not what we're talking about today, because quantum...
What are we going to talk about today?
Well, the thing is, this is the problem with science fiction in popular culture. You get a word like quantum, it sounds woo-woo and amazing, and suddenly you can get quantum everything. You can get quantum bananas and quantum underpants and quantum leaps. But they don't actually use the word in the sense that it's meant by those users, and that's a natural thing in language. But what we're talking about today is quantum biology, a fairly recently emerged field in terms of the popular understanding of it, but it goes back to 1939 at least, and that's what we're going to be talking about today.
And that seems to be what matters on today's episode.
It does. And after a long preamble, let's go back to an Austrian physicist fleeing Nazi Germany for Ireland to help to establish the Institute for Advanced Studies in Dublin. This is Erwin Schrödinger. Schrödinger published a book in 1944 called What is Life? And he was looking at how events in space and time take place within the spatial boundary of a living organism. How can they be accounted for by physics and chemistry? A couple of decades later, in 1962, with the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine being shared by Watson and Wilkins and Crick for the discovery of the structure of DNA, all these guys were physicists, and all these guys credit Schrödinger for inspiring their work. And in fact, Wilkins went as far to say that it was Schrödinger that made him want to become a biophysicist. So I went to the University of Surrey in the UK to speak to two researchers in quantum biology.
The idea with the stability of DNA, and this was Schrödinger's original hypothesis, is that you need some kind of additional ordering principle on top of the thermal ordering that you'd normally expect to see in order to keep the level of mutation so low. And his original hypothesis was that quantum mechanics could be like an ordering rod for DNA. The original idea certainly was that thermal ordering alone should give us 10,000 times more mutations than we currently see. And it still is very much possible, and we have some research currently ongoing in our center that DNA repair enzymes could have quantum mechanical action within them.
So who's that?
My name is Safa El-Ali. I'm a theoretical physicist working in the quantum biology research group. And I look at modeling open quantum systems that could potentially be applied to biological systems.
And along with Sapphire, to tell this incredible story, we also have...
I'm Adeline D'Souza, and I am an experimental biologist, and I'm looking into avian magnetoreception or animal magnetoreception and how quantum mechanics might be playing a role in how animals detect the Earth's magnetic field.
Okay. So give us this story about quantum biology.
So firstly, it's important to understand the difficulty with respect to quantum biology and the reason it isn't much more of an established field today. There's been a lot of work done, but it's only in the last few years that there's been established growing evidence for specific mechanisms within biological cells that make use of quantum mechanics to actually happen.
Biology is not a natural place to look for quantum mechanics because they are complicated, warm systems. And usually when we see quantum mechanics happening, it's in fairly cold, simple systems. In general, the warmer your system, the shorter the length of relevant quantum effects so for really big systems, the quantum wavelength, as it were, is much smaller than the item itself. So it doesn't get anywhere useful.
So operating as close as we can get to absolute zero.
Yes, essentially.
And that's the issue. So if you're doing science at absolute zero, if you want to understand what's happening in the quantum world, biological systems, as we all know, are all warm and wet and difficult. So how can you study warm, wet things at a quantum level? It just doesn't seem that quantum phenomena would naturally happen or have an effect in large, warm, wet biological systems. So the contrast between quantum physics and biology is not just to do with the fact that people understand quantum physics to be to do with the science of the very, very small.
The subcellular and the submolecular.
Yeah, and even smaller, right? So it's also to do with the fact that people see quantum effects being done in science at very, very cold temperatures, and biology happens in warm things.
And very quickly then, we are about to do an episode on very, very cold temperatures. Cryobiology.
That's right.
So that's coming.
Cryobiology.
Yeah.
That's coming up.
So if quantum biology really is a thing, if quantum theory and quantum effects are visible, observable things in biological systems, how come there's less attention being paid to it? So why is it that somewhat of a maverick?
Sapphire says that there's a couple of reasons, and that they mostly come from hostile or grating attitudes between groups of scientists.
Physicists in general, we like to simplify systems as much as possible so we can do maths about them, whereas biology is a horrifyingly complex mix of systems, and it's very daunting to think about applying our techniques, which we typically reduce systems down to as many components as possible. Biology, on the other hand, I think biologists sort of think, well, we've done this quite well for quite a long time without you needing to get involved. And in general, it seems quite unrealistic in some way that quantum mechanics could play a role in biology, because all the quantum systems we're familiar with are incredibly cold, incredibly simple, whereas biological systems are complicated and warm.
And this is not just esoteric theorizing, right? Sapphire and Edelin are really looking at practical applications of the work, and there's two really solid examples that show how quantum mechanics is playing a role in biology, and that's magnetoreception and photosynthesis. So magnetoreception, you're familiar with the idea that birds can seem to find their direction when they travel south for the winter and so on. And the theory was that they have kind of lumps of magnetite in their brains that allows them to sense the lines of magnetic force around the world, right? So when scientists actually looked for evidence of magnetite or magnetic material in the birds of brains that migrate, it was very notable in its absence. So the question is, how is this happening?
I think both of these have quite interesting downstream applications as well, because understanding them at a more fundamental level will allow us to potentially come up with more technologies or a better understanding of what is going on at these warmer temperatures, and then either biotechnology or potentially even quantum computing applications further down the line.
So Sapphire and Edelin have mentioned magnetoreception and photosynthesis. What is it that biology cannot really explain about them, but that quantum biology seems to be able to define?
So photosynthesis is a very efficient process. Once the light is absorbed by a photosystem, it manages to convey that energy to a very, very high degree, much higher than most current photovoltaic cells and the mechanism that they use. And originally, the idea was that it did a random walk.
Okay, keep talking me through this. I'm not there yet.
So think of a traveling salesman. If a traveling salesman walks along from place to place randomly, trying all the different routes that they could eventually go by to find the most efficient way to have the most success, it's going to be a really incredibly inefficient way of optimizing their journey, right? If you just go randomly in various directions. Now, the thinking here is that if you think of the packets of energy that photosynthesis is delivering to the system, as it were, to the plant, that these packets of energy, or this traveling salesman, they explore every single possible way simultaneously.
That makes more sense efficiency-wise. And that is one of the ways that quantum biology could potentially make sense, because if we can use that understanding to create more biomimetic solar cells, we could really, really increase the amount of energy that we can harvest from the sun and make solar energy super cheap, definitely more efficient.
Well, that is just spectacular.
It's completely amazing.
So we see this incredible system in plants that has evolved over millions or billions of years. And to assume that we'd be able to create exactly the same thing in an electrical system could be seen as...
maybe just a little bit arrogant.
Just a touch.
But just think about what it could mean if we could create solar cells that were as efficient as trees in converting sunlight to energy. Think of the revolution in energy that would
amazing. So what Sapphire and Edelin are saying is that if we can understand what's actually going on in this extraordinarily well-developed system that has evolved through evolution, maybe we could create much more efficient versions of that for our own use, like those solar cell panels that you're talking about.
Exactly.
So that's photosynthesis, but what about the magnetoreceptions? What can be explained there that cannot be explained by biology?
Well, here's Adeline again.
In biological systems, a lot of the complexes that we work with are hugely stable. They are polymers. They've got really strong bonds between them. What's always been missing in the magnetoreception investigation is the absence or sort of latentness of anything that's ferrous that can be used in a magnetosensory way.
So people hypothesized that there must be some form of magnetic sensitive material in the brains of these birds, and they went looking for these magnetic materials and they found nothing.
Yeah, nothing's been found so far, and that was always a bit of a mystery. And then using a well-established type of reaction from spin chemistry, there was a proposal for this model that could potentially be occurring in a biological system. When this protein, this biological molecule, absorbs a photon of light, it pushes it to an excited state. So it elevates the energy in the system, and that causes it to split into two component parts, two radicals, which are components that have a lone electron, so an electron that is unpaired. And this makes it a lot more unstable. So this instability makes it more vulnerable to sensing the Earth's magnetic field. And that's where quantum biology comes in for magnetoreception. If we understand what's happening in this mechanism, we could potentially use this idea of using magnetic fields to control biology or expression of genes and proteins. We can use that as a therapeutic as well.
Fascinating stuff.
So as we see from Edelin's example, suddenly we've not just got potential explanations of what's going on, but also real practical explanations of what's going on and how potentially they could be applied in real life applications.
So that is the argument to help silence the naysayers. But what is the reaction in that community? The biologists that have said, hang on, this is our field, like, hands off. We don't need you guys.
That's a very interesting question, because if you boil what I do down into non-biological terms, I look at room temperature open quantum systems. And if we can model room temperature open quantum systems that have long-lived quantum effects, then that's a hugely useful thing for a massive range of applications. So there's definitely a range of applicability here. But on the other hand, people are quite dubious, I think, just that room temperature quantum effects could ever be long-lived enough.
So they're not saying that quantum effects don't happen at room temperature. They're saying that quantum effects are so small at room temperature that they wouldn't have any effect on these large, warm biological systems, the wet systems you were talking about.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
So I have to say bravo to them both. Everybody wins, not only for the hopes of the future that their work displays, but also for the challenge of it all. I mean, there seems to be a lot of friction in and about and towards their work. And so what is it exactly that drew both Edelin and Sapphire into such a niche field?
I think I like the challenge of having to describe something that exists independently from me, whereas a lot of quantum mechanics is about designing rather than describing, if that makes sense. If my system is too hot, then I say, okay, well, let's just cool it down. Whereas I can't do that. I have to work with things I can't change. And I think I really enjoy the challenge of that.
Physics has always been one of those things that is, from the outside at least, super elegant, and you get to explain different systems. And I've always had an appreciation for it from a more conceptual, maybe, rather than mathematical standpoint. I, however, am a biologist, and so that's always been a very spare time hobby interest. So when I found out that quantum processes could be happening in biological systems, it definitely piqued my interest. And then I started looking into it a bit more. And I think the more you look into it, the more intrigued you get. And over time, some of it can manifest as a frustration, but it's like a problem that you kind of want to sink your teeth into.
And so before we go, I think it's important to note that, both Edelin and Sapphire are adamant that interdisciplinary discussion and collaboration is how these fields move forward. And that sometimes biologists and physicists do butt heads and don't agree, but if they work together, they can make real progress.
There are definitely pockets where being niche is fine, and you can do your own thing, and you won't really have to ever talk to someone from a different field. But in general, not having tunnel vision is a good thing. If I have a specific research interest and I can find people who would traditionally be from another research group and we can work on that problem together, then we have a much broader range of tools to attack that problem, which is fantastically helpful because sometimes you don't even have the language to talk about what you don't know.
So there you go.
I think we all are happy together, yeah.
Isn't it extraordinary? Physics and biology, you thought that they were completely separate, and we are seeing things like magnetoreception, we're seeing things like photosynthesis, we're even seeing things like the sense of smell being explained by quantum phenomena.
The Internet of Smells.
Wouldn't that be cool?
I can't wait.
So rate us on your favorite podcast app, and we look forward to next time.
Thanks for listening.